Let's spend a little bit of time together today thinking intentionally about the culture that we create within our households for our families. My guest today is Joel Montgomery, and he helps us with crafting a vision and a strategy for family culture. Hey, I'm Jay Holland, and I want to welcome you to Let's Parent on Purpose. This is a podcast for families who want to thrive and not just survive their parenting years. Each week, I'll bring you an insight or an interview that will help strengthen your marriage, parenting, or your walk with Jesus. If you find this podcast helpful, I would ask that you subscribe and share it with your friends. You can also go to letsparentonpurpose.com and search for past topics, as well as get a hold of free resources that I've created to help your family. And as always, I am forever grateful that you have chosen to invest in your family by spending this time with me each week. And if you find it a worthwhile investment, just like I said in the intro, my big ask of you today is, would you share this specific episode with somebody else that you think could benefit? The way that people find out about this podcast the most is somebody who cares about them shared it with you. And so if you're one of the ones listening and somebody shared this with you, they care about you. And that's pretty cool to think that they were thinking of you as they listened to this. Let me tell you a little bit about today's episode. We're going to talk about family culture, and Marvin Bauer defined culture as simply the way we do things around here. Culture grows everywhere, in nations, businesses, in nonprofits, churches, and even families. Cultures tell us where to go, why we're going, and how we're going to get there. And my guest today, Joel Montgomery, is somebody who has been uniquely gifted by God to help organizations and families shape culture. Let me tell you a little bit about Joel. Joel and his wife Elaine have been married for 10 years, and they have 3 kids, Sofia Grace, Julia, Joy, and Mateus. Over the past 12 years, Joel has been helping for-profits, nonprofits, and churches around the world create an authentic culture that turns their people into a passionate tribe on mission. Most recently, Joel has applied his expertise of culture to the topic of family, founding Family on Purpose with his wife Elaine. And that's why it felt like such a good fit for Let's Parent on Purpose. You got somebody that's helping intentionally shape families on purpose. So they teach parents with young children how to focus their limited time on what's most important so that they can live more purposefully together. And that's the whole purpose of this podcast, not just this specific one, blah, 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 this specific one, but all of them. So as you listen, I just want to point out a couple of things, some bonus goodies that are attached in the show notes. Joel has provided for us a free digital download for Let's Parent on Purpose listeners called 10 Tips to Do Family on Purpose. Also, I'm going to give you a link to his Create a Family Culture Blueprint in 7 days. It's an online course that you can check out if you're interested in. So without further ado, I am going to let you in on my conversation with Joel Montgomery. Joel, thank you so much for joining us on Let's Parent on Purpose. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jay. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to get to meet you. We've been emailing back and forth, and I was really intrigued by what you do with families. And so I would just love to just start with how you got into it. Tell us a little bit about how you arrived at the place where you're investing in intentional families.
Sure. So I guess I'll go back a few years. After college, I spent a year in Costa Rica as a missionary and came back to the States and didn't really feel like the Lord had called me to full-time mission work. And so I went into sales, the obvious choice, right? And I was working for a American manufacturer of equipment, and my area was all of Latin America, and so it was a dream job for someone just out of college. I was on the phone with Mexico, Argentina, Brazil every month. I was traveling on the company's dime, and it was amazing for about 2 years, and then I kind of reflected a bit and realized the sole purpose of my work was just to make money for the company. And that just wasn't motivating anymore. So I went back to the drawing board, went to business school to figure out, okay, I knew I loved business, but I wanted to combine that with my desire to have social impact. And so that led me to working around the world, And so the past 12 years, I've been working with for-profits, nonprofits, and churches, helping them to craft an authentic culture that turns their people into a passionate tribe on a mission. And so
Hmm.
I've done that for a number of years. And then when I was working in the UK, actually lost my job. It was a sudden thing, and that really started a second kind of reflection time, and I began to look at what I'd been doing in life and realized I had been helping other people to develop their culture, other organizations to develop their organizational culture, and yet I had left all of those skills at the office, and I had not
Hmm.
actually thought about how to intentionally craft the culture in my own home.
Hmm.
And so my wife and I sat down. We felt like we were drowning, and we said, we've got to do things differently. And so we sat together and created our own family culture where we created a family purpose. We set out a set of key principles for our family, and we looked at our habits and created intentional practices that would enable us to live out our purpose. And that was a number of months ago, and the fruit that has come from that has just been incredible. And so we decided, let's not just stop with our family, let's actually begin to work with other families. And so we began to do that, and it's been really exciting to see that it doesn't just work with our family, that when you're being intentional with your family, that is something that really is powerful in shaping the trajectory of other families as well.
Yeah, I feel like that as the dad goes, so goes the house so often on this.
Yeah,
And it's so easy for us men to get wrapped up in our identity with the performance of our jobs.
absolutely.
And so, there was a book, it was by Andy Stanley. I think it might have been re-released under the title "Winning at Work and at Home,"
Mm,
but the initial title that he came out with was called "Choosing to Cheat," and I think that was the copy I ended up getting.
okay.
And basically, he was saying, you can't go at 100% at everything in your life. And so often, what happens, especially with men, but it's the same with women often, is that we give our 100% best. We give our very, very best to our careers. And then what happens is our families end up getting our fumes sometimes. And, the reality is, very rarely are your coworkers going to be gathered around your deathbed or far before your deathbed when you're really sick or hurting or all of these things. And so we don't want to live our lives giving our second or third or fourth best to the people, the only particular people that God has given us to be the primary shepherds and stewards of. And so it sounds like this was one of those aha moments in your life. And did you see that that's kind of what was happening, is like your work was getting your very best, and then it turns out that you're not that important to your work. They're ready to replace you in a heartbeat.
Absolutely. That's exactly what happened. After that moment in time when I realized I had no purpose in the work I was doing, and that really started a journey of adding purpose to my work. And so all of the work I was doing was with social entrepreneurship, going into poor countries like Pakistan and Honduras and Turkey, and helping and Nepal, and helping those people. And so the work I was doing was not just making money, it was very purposeful work. The big aha I had was I was focusing my attention on those people more
Hmm.
than my own family. And uh, the reality is I was engaged at home, but not to the degree that I am now. And it
Yeah.
really, I had to switch my mind and say, I need to first make sure that my family is flourishing, number one, and then we can help others flourish. But if my family is not flourishing and I'm helping other people, whether my colleagues, my company, or my clients, whoever, if they're flourishing but my family's not, that's a problem. And so I really began to redefine what success looks like for my life, and that started with the family.
So, what did you come up with? What are you, as you define success in your life and in your family? What's a picture of success?
So, picture of success for us. So, our family purpose is we work together to love God and serve others. And so we every morning in our one of the things that we started was a family devotional every morning, and so we actually start that with our family devotional, or with excuse me with our family purpose. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's different layers in that. So part of that is us working as a team together. Part of that is actually us working to create a family business that can provide for our family, but also we see that as an opportunity to teach our kids. And so
Mm-hmm.
right now our kids are still fairly young, 5, 3, and 7 months. So, they're not doing a lot of work in the family business, but that's kind of the vision, is that as they get older, as we continue to homeschool them, that they'll get to the place where we don't want them to wait till they're 18, 16 or 18 to get out in the real world and work. We want actually to help mentor them through the family business. And then the key thing is that what's the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is for us to glorify God and for us to love our neighbor as ourselves. And so everything that we do, we want to make sure that we're working together to do that, and that we are glorifying God, and we're intentional about serving others in that as well.
Yeah, that's so. Was there a specific process? Because you came from a background of helping corporations and churches and stuff like that help craft these kind of things. Was there a specific process that you worked through with your own family to come to this?
Yeah, so I have worked with a number of organizations to be able to go through that process. And so what I did is kind of took a step back and said, okay, how much of this is transferable to a
Mm-hmm.
family? And what I realized is a significant portion of it is transferable. I mean, if you think about it, the most successful organizations on the planet, they are really intentional about crafting culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they invest millions of dollars every year into their culture, and they do that because they know it's a strategic advantage. So you're talking about organizations that have tens of thousands of people around the world who are all rowing in the same direction. And so, you take tens of thousands, and then you think of families of 5, 7, larger families of 8 or 10, and it works in that way as well. And so the key thing is really kind of three areas of culture. I've simplified it a bit for the family, but there's kind of
Mm-hmm.
three key areas of culture for the family. There's your purpose, and your purpose is the future that you want to create for your family. It's why you do what you do. The second piece is your principles, and your principles are what are most important to you. They are the truth you believe as a family and what you want to be known for in this world. And then the final area are your practices, and those are regular habits that lead you where you want to go. So they enable you to live out your family purpose and your family principles on a regular basis. And so really what we did is we took those pieces bit by bit and said, okay, what is it that we're aiming towards? And so my wife and I did that together, and we kind of put a number of dreams that we have together out there, and then we began to synthesize those and come up with a purpose that we felt really embodied what we wanted to accomplish together in our family and in the world. And then we began to look at our principles. So what are those core elements of what we want to make sure that we are known for as a family, that we want to pass on to our kids? And the reality is most parents have some form of principles in
Mm-hmm.
place. And they may not call them principles, but they've got some basics there. What I think of all the questions that we asked ourselves, the one that helped us to zero in the most was, if you could only pass 5 lessons in life to your kids, what would those be? And that helped us to zero in on what was most important to us in a way that really no other question has. And so I would really encourage people, if they are kind of struggling with thinking about, okay, what is most important to me? Really thinking about, okay, God forbid, if you're no longer going to be on this earth, and you have a limited amount of time to be able to teach your kids, what are those 5 things? And those 5 things are going to be in your principles in some way. And then the practices are very simple of really looking at, okay, what are those habits that we have as a family? Would we classify those as positive or negative habits? And then do those habits, do they enable us to live out our purpose or our principles? And so it was, but it really falls into those 3 buckets of purpose, principles, and practices.
That's great. I'm thinking right now as we're recording this, it's mid-April, but I think this one it's probably going to be mid or late May in the schedule. And the whole world has been in the midst of this COVID-19 crisis. And, I like to kind of date, just announce when I'm recording things because things are changing so rapidly. It's hard to say. We have no idea. As a church, we have no idea. We know the plan for this week and we know basically next week. But after that, we just don't know. And in the same way in family structure, the same thing. But so I have 2 thoughts. One is if we're all still in the midst of lockdown and scrambling and all of these terrible news items, it can be hard to even think about something like this.
Absolutely.
And then at the other hand, I think of in Matthew 7, when Jesus says, the person who hears my words and obeys them is like the person who built their house on the rock, and the rains came and the floods came, and the house stood, versus those who heard and did nothing, and the rains came and the floods came, and great was the fall. And so, as even those listening right now, I know some of you have already really put effort towards being intentional with your family, establishing a family culture, looking for routines and habits. And some of those might have been disrupted during this time, but how much more solid we can be as families if we put these things in place. And then I like how you try to narrow it down to what are 5 lessons to teach your kids. Now we know we're going to teach our kids 10,000 things.
Absolutely.
But I've found this, that in making plans, the more elaborate my plan, the less likely any particular part of my plan is to happen. And so, if you come down with five different principles, that's, you can remember that on one hand. If you're, unless one of them's been severed, you can remember that on one hand, and then you can think of different ways to teach those 5 principles over and over and over again. But if you think of the 15 things or 20 things that you want to instill in your kids, it's hard to stay on top of that. And so you tend to do nothing in there. So what have you found? So as you've interacted with people, one of the questions that I have, now your family is young. You've got little kids, so they're kind of hostage to whatever mom and dad want to do.
Yep.
And that's actually wonderful because they won't know any different. As they're growing up, they're not going to remember a time when we didn't operate this way. My family, is spread from 8 years old to almost 18 years old. And if somebody is in that state and they're trying to institute something like this with a family where the kids are a little older, where there already are established habits and routines, what would your counsel be to them?
Sure. It's a great question. It really goes back to my advice would go back to how organizations do this type of work. So with a young family like ours, as you said, we can kind of dictate what our culture is going to be, and our kids will adapt to that. And that's honestly why, as I've been working with families, the majority of the families that I've been working with have had young kids, because frankly, I think it's easier.
It is, yeah.
If you set that foundation, right? That being said, it's important to be able to do this no matter where you are in your family journey. So if you have older kids, really the opportunity there is to involve them in the process. So where my wife and I did this ourselves, and we are communicating our culture to our kids, for older kids, it's an opportunity to be able to come together and talk about, okay, what is it that we're about? What is it that we're trying to do as a family? And it's probably going to take a little bit longer to be able to go through that process, but it is really important, I think, on a number of levels. Firstly, when your kids are engaged and involved in that, there's going to be a lot more buy-in, right? So obviously, if you've got teenagers and you're saying, okay, this is a new thing, we're all going to completely shift the family and go in this direction, it's not going to go over as well. Whereas if you come and you talk about, okay, what is it that we're about? What have we been doing, and involve them in that process, they're going to be much more bought in and excited to be able to be a part of that and make that real.
Yeah.
And that's what we do with organizations, is, you've got to find key people within the organization and involve them in that process as representatives of the rest of the organization.
That's good.
The second thing is is when you're working with older kids, they're able to kind of give their thoughts on how you're creating this, and then because they've been involved in that, they are also able to keep one another accountable of that. And so that's something that people need to know. That, I mean, even my 5-year-old, she threw out one of our principles to me last week. So I'll give you an example. So I like to joke around with my kids. So I cut up an orange, and I put the orange in front of me at the table. And my daughter said, "What about the rest of the family?" And I said, "Oh, these are for me." And she said, "Well, you have to love your neighbor as yourself, Dad." And, she was taking one of our principles, and she was keeping me accountable to that, even though I was just kidding with her. And so with the older kids, the same thing. When they've been a part of that journey and everybody agrees, okay, this is what we're about as a family, then really the next step, and especially for the parents, you have to be open to the fact that your kids are going to really be looking at if you're living this out or not. And so your culture is not just what you put on paper. Your culture is the actions. And so you have to make sure that for an authentic culture, there's a connection between what you say you do and what you actually do. And your kids, especially the older ones, are going to call you out if you don't do that.
Yeah, kids, especially teenagers, are hypocrisy radars. So if you think that you're going to say one thing that you're not living, you're in a dream world.
Absolutely.
Excuse me. So do you have particular resources that are available if somebody is interested in walking this path of starting to create a purposeful family?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I would love for anybody who's interested in family culture and wants to know a little bit more, I've got a free digital download that I've created that gives 10 tips for how to do family on purpose. And so I'd love to be able to share that with people. The link is bit.ly/let's parent on purpose. And I'll send that to you so that you have that as well. And then I've also created a course. It's a online course, and it's got 13 small lessons. It's about 70 minutes of content. The key thing, though, is that there's 5 exercises to do in a couple, or if you have older kids in a family. And that link is on my Instagram on the bio. My Instagram is Joel R. Montgomery. And people can find a link to be able to get to that. So those are 2 ways that people can kind of take a tangible step to be able to get a little bit more information on doing family, creating their family culture.
That's great. Yeah, and I will put these links in the show notes. They're also in the Things for Thursday email for this week. And excuse me, if you don't get that, you can text the word things to 66866 to pick up that Things for Thursday email. Additionally, one of the things, this reminds me of actually a conversation I had with my pastor's wife, Jenny Price, last year, where we were talking about marriage on mission. So my wife and I walked through something similar. Now, our mission statement is a little more complicated, which is probably the opposite of the corporate world, but that's probably my fault too. But ours was, God has gifted us with resources, relationships, and responsibility, and we'll use our gifts to enjoy one another in Jesus and heal a broken world with the gospel of Christ. And so this has been something that again, like our families, because our kids are a little older, they're able to understand a little more. It's a little longer, but then as we have a single mom into our house for dinner, we're able to point back and say, hey, look, God's given us a home and he's given us this extra time together. And we're using this to help heal a broken world with the love of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, we've gotten extra money. One of the things we want to do is enjoy one another and Jesus together. So like we want to be a family that plays together. So it really does I think the thing is a lot of parents are doing a lot of the things already. They just haven't established the high end over it. And so it can be much more haphazard.
That's
and
right.
so it sounds like what you're helping moms and dads walk through is, let's put some organization to the stuff that you're already doing. Let's put some vocabulary to it, because just like with emotions, if I can't name an emotion, sometimes I can be held captive to that emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same way, if I can't articulate what my family's about, my family might be about a lot of good things, but I can also feel aimless. And we don't want our kids to grow up and feel like they are going to get their identity from their careers, or their accomplishments, or their hobbies, or their looks, or any of that. They're made in the image of God, and I want a family that is deeply embedded, that God has given us this family for generations to be a blessing to the world. And I just appreciate, Joel, what you and your family are doing towards that. And would you mind if I close this out by praying for you and the ministry God's given you?
Please.
All right. Father, I just thank you for this time, and I thank you for Joel and Elaine, his wife, and their family. God, I pray that you would bless their effort to live intentional and on purpose, and I pray as they interact with other families that you would give them the wisdom and strength to guide, to help put words and vision to the desires of our heart, to have thriving families, Lord God, that are a benefit to the world and a blessing to the kingdom of God. And so we thank you for this time. And for those who are listening, God, I just pray that you would put on their hearts exactly what they're supposed to do with this. They would take that step, get these resources, and begin to craft together their own family purpose, principles and practices. I pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Hey, thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to having you back in the future to catch up on some of how this is going.
Thank you, Jay. I appreciate you having me.
Right. Friend, thanks so much for listening today. I pray it's been a blessing to you, and if it has, please share this episode with somebody that you care about. If God lays it on your heart, I'd love for you to consider joining our Patreon support community. You can find out about that by going to letsparentonpurpose.com. Finally, if you've got a topic that you'd like to hear me address, send me an email at jay@letsparentonpurpose.com, or give me a shout on the Let's Parent on Purpose Facebook page. Hey, please never forget that parenting is a marathon, not a sprint, and that you need a good church family to thrive through all of the different challenges that you're going to face. Keep pointing each other to Jesus, and enjoy the gift of life that God's giving you today. Hey, whatever season you're in, it won't always be this way, so set your hope on Christ and not your circumstances. Have a blessed day, and I'll talk to you soon.